Some things are patient enough to cross the distance one photograph at a time. If you have found your way here, you were meant to. Take your place among those who listen from the other side of the lens. Leave your mark so the signal holds. Summon the next frame, so when the image develops, you are already watching. And if something in a photograph has ever looked back at you, confess it now, before the shutter opens again. I have been a bridge inspector for the Commonwealth of Virginia for 14 years. Before that, I spent 3 years in a graduate program, studying structural engineering at Virginia Tech. And before that, I was a kid who grew up watching my grandfather walk the underside of a railroad trestle in Bland County. With nothing but a flashlight and a pocket knife, tapping bolts and listening to the sound they made when they answered back. He would cock his head to the side after each tap, the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat, and sometimes he would nod, and sometimes he would frown, and I learned to read the difference before I learned to read the gauges. He told me once that a good bridge talks to you, that the steel remembers what it carries, and if you're patient, if you're honest, it tells you where it hurts. I believed him then. I still believe him now. But I have learned that some structures remember more than weight. My name is Thomas Kehoe. I am, or I was, depending on how you measure employment status when you're on indefinite administrative leave, a Level 3 Bridge Safety Inspector assigned to the Western Division of the Virginia Department of Transportation, covering 22 counties across the Blue Ridge and the Allegheny Plateau. My territory included just over 900 structures, highway overpasses, county road spans, pedestrian crossings, railroad underpasses, a handful of historic covered bridges maintained by local preservation boards, and one structure that I will spend the rest of this account trying to describe, honestly, because honesty is the only thing I have left that hasn't been redacted. The structure is designated WC0412 in the state inventory. It spans a creek called Bonner Run, in a place most maps identify as Weldon County. Though, if you go looking for Weldon County, you will find that its borders were redrawn in 1934, and its records were folded into neighboring jurisdictions in a way that makes precise historical research more difficult than it should be. The bridge was built in 1923 as a 2-lane concrete deck arch with steel railings and a timber plank walkway on the east side. It is 140 feet long. It carries a road that was once designated State Route 16 Alt, but was decommissioned in 1971 when a newer alignment was built a mile south. The bridge should have been demolished. It was not. It was kept in the inventory because the road still technically serves as an access route for 3 rural properties upstream, and VDOT has a legal obligation to maintain any structure still in active service, no matter how marginal. I remember the first time I drove out to it. October 2012. My GPS lost the route about 4 miles from the site, the signal stuttering and then dying entirely, and I spent 20 minutes creeping along a road that had more patched tar than pavement, the kind of road that feels like it is being held together by habit rather than material. The trees closed in on both sides. Tulip poplar and white oak, mostly their October colors just past peak, the leaves gone to that dull amber that comes right before they drop, and the branches show through like ribs. When I rounded the last curve and the bridge came into view, I stopped the truck and sat there for a moment, with the engine idling and the heater clicking softly against the dash. It was beautiful in a way that infrastructure rarely is. The arch was graceful, proportioned with a care you don't see in modern construction, and the concrete had aged to a pale, mottled gray that looked almost like limestone in the flat afternoon light. Bonner Run moved beneath it, shallow and unhurried, the water catching what was left of the daylight and scattering it against the underside of the arch in slow ripples. There were no other vehicles, no houses visible, no sound except the water and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere deep in the canopy above. It felt like the kind of place that had simply been left alone long enough to forget it was part of anything. I have inspected WC0412 9 times, once every 2 years, per federal regulation, starting in that autumn of 2012. Every inspection followed the same protocol. I drove out alone, usually in October, because October is when the inspection schedule for my western rotation falls. I parked on the gravel pull-off on the south approach. I walked the deck, measuring crack widths with a pocket comparator card and noting spalling on the concrete arches. I climbed underneath, using a 12-foot extension ladder to examine the bearing seats and the abutment walls, working my way methodically from east to west, checking for moisture intrusion, rebar exposure, settlement cracks. I took photographs, hundreds of photographs over the years, to document conditions for the biennial report. I filed my findings through the state's bridge management system. I submitted my photographs as attachments. The photographs are why I am speaking now. I need to explain how bridge inspection photography works, because the distinction matters. We don't take artistic photographs. We don't compose shots. Every image is utilitarian, a specific structural element, a specific deficiency, taken at a specific angle prescribed by the inspection manual, so that conditions can be compared across cycles. There is a photograph of the north abutment face. There is a photograph of each bearing pad. There is a photograph of the deck surface at 20-foot intervals. There are close-ups of any cracks wider than a 1/16 of an inch. There are overview shots from each approach and each elevation. The camera I used for most of my career was a department-issued Canon PowerShot, later replaced by a ruggedized Olympus. Standard digital point-and-shoot. No filters, no processing, no editing. The files go straight from the memory card to the state server. Every image time-stamped, geotagged, cataloged. There is no room for interpretation. There is no room for art. There is only the record. In 2014, during my second inspection of WC0412, I took a photograph of the west elevation, a standard framing that shows the full profile of the bridge from the downstream side, maybe 60 feet back from the structure. Bonner Run was low that day, almost dry, and the creek bed was a pale spread of river gravel, bleached nearly white by weeks without rain. I remember the light was flat, overcast, the kind of sky that makes colors recede and edges soften until everything looks like it belongs to the same gray family. I was standing on the gravel, with my boots crunching on the dry stones, holding the Olympus at chest height, and I took the shot the way I had taken it 100 times before on 100 other bridges. Mechanical. Prescribed. Ordinary. The photograph shows the arch, the deck, the railing, the tree line above, and on the bridge deck, slightly left of center, there is what appears to be a figure. I did not see anyone on the bridge that day. I am certain of this. The road is functionally dead. In 9 visits across 14 years, I have never seen another vehicle parked there. I have never encountered a pedestrian, a cyclist, a hunter, a hiker, anyone. The properties upstream are, as far as I have been able to determine, unoccupied, and have been for years. When I stood on the creek bed and raised the camera, I looked at the bridge. I looked at it the way I always do, scanning for visible deficiencies, checking the railing alignment, noting the vegetation encroaching on the south approach. there was no one on it. But in the photograph, there is a shape on the deck that I cannot explain as shadow, as vegetation, as a trick of compression artifacts. It is upright. It is roughly the proportions of a person standing still. It is dark. Not black, exactly, but a density that doesn't match anything around it, like a place where the light forgot to land. It has no discernible features, no face, no clothing detail, no clear edges. It looks like someone standing on the bridge at a distance that should still resolve basic human details, but doesn't, as if the figure is composed of something the lens can register, but cannot quite interpret. I noticed it when I was reviewing photographs for the report, maybe 2 weeks after the inspection. It was late on a weeknight, the kind of hour where the district office is empty, except for the hum of the overhead fluorescents and the faint ticking of the HVAC cycling down, and I was at my desk with a mug of gas station coffee, going cold beside the keyboard, clicking through images in the order I had taken them: deck surface, railing detail, bearing pad, and then the west elevation. I stopped. I leaned closer to the monitor. I enlarged the image until the pixels began to separate, and the shape held. It did not dissolve into noise the way a shadow or a compression artifact would. I compared it to the 2012 photographs of the same elevation. In 2012, the same framing shows empty deck, nothing but concrete and daylight and the far tree line. I told myself it was a shadow from an overhanging branch that had grown in the intervening 2 years. I submitted the report. I moved on. 900 structures, 22 counties, and a 2-year cycle that never slows down. You don't dwell. You file and you drive to the next one, and you let the system carry the weight, because that is what the system is for. 2 years passed. I inspected overpasses and county bridges and pedestrian crossings. I filed reports. I ate lunch in my truck in gravel lots and listened to the radio and thought about load ratings and pension contributions and whether my daughter would transfer to a different school in the spring. Ordinary things. The things that fill a life when the life is functioning the way it is supposed to. In October 2016, I inspected WC0412 again. Overcast. Run was running shallow, but not dry. A thin ribbon of tea-colored water threading between the exposed stones. The trees had turned late that year and were still mostly green, with only a few maples along the ridgeline showing color, and the woods felt heavier for it, still holding their summer weight. I followed the same protocol. I took the same prescribed photographs. I remember being slightly more aware of the deck when I shot the west elevation, glancing up from the viewfinder to confirm what I already knew, that the bridge was empty, and then pressing the shutter. When I reviewed the photographs 3 weeks later, I found the figure again. Same west elevation shot. Same position, deck left of center, but closer. Not closer to the railing, closer to the camera. It had moved forward on the deck toward the south approach, toward the end of the bridge where I had parked, where I had stood, where I had walked. In 2014, the figure appeared to be roughly at midspan. In 2016, it was maybe a third of the way from midspan toward the south abutment. I measured this using the railing posts as reference. They are spaced at 8-foot intervals, and I could count them in both photographs with reasonable precision. The figure had moved approximately 32 feet closer to my position in 2 years. I want to be precise about what I felt when I realized this. I did not feel terror. I did not feel a chill run down my spine. I felt a slow, dull confusion, like looking at a calculation that keeps returning the wrong answer no matter how many times you check the inputs. Then annoyance, at myself for comparing two photographs taken under different lighting conditions from positions that were probably not identical. I told myself I had been standing further back from the bridge in 2014, or that the focal length had differed because I had used a different zoom setting. I told myself these things because they were reasonable, because they were the kinds of explanations that a structural engineer gives himself when confronted with something that doesn't fit the data. I did, however, do something I had never done before. I went back to the full 2016 photo set and looked at every single image. Not just the elevation shots, but the deck shots, the close-ups, the underneath shots, all 140 of them. In 7 photographs, I found the figure. It was in the background of a deck surface shot, visible between the railing posts, like a dark smear caught in the gap. It was at the far end of an overview taken from the north approach, standing where the road met the deck. It was in the corner of a photograph of a spalled area on the east arch. Just a sliver of dark shape, barely distinguishable from the shadow of the arch itself, but undeniably there. Always upright, always still, always at a position consistent with standing on or near the deck. In photographs taken underneath the bridge, where I was crouching at the base of the piers, shooting upward at the bearing seats, it was not present. Only in photographs that included a line of sight to the deck surface. I pulled up the 2014 set and went through it the same way. I found the figure in 3 images. In 2012, the first inspection, I found nothing. Clean deck in every shot. So here is what I had. Nothing in 2012, 3 appearances in 2014, 7 in 2016. Closer each time, more frequent each time, and I had not seen it with my own eyes during any visit. I reported it. I want to be clear about that. I didn't bury it or pretend it wasn't there. I filed a supplementary note with my 2016 report, flagging what I called a recurring photographic anomaly on structure WC0412 and requesting a second opinion from the division imaging specialist. The imaging specialist was a man named Dale Everett, who worked out of the Staunton district office and who I had dealt with before on questions about photo documentation standards. Dale was thorough, precise, the kind of person who kept calibration logs for equipment that didn't technically require them, and who could tell you the sensor crop factor of every camera the department had ever issued. He looked at the images, agreed that there was an anomalous element in the frame, and told me it was likely a lens artifact caused by internal reflection off the concrete deck surface under specific lighting conditions. He said the Olympus I was using had a known issue with ghost images under flat, overcast skies. He copied me on a technical bulletin from 2009 that described the phenomenon. The bulletin described lens flare. It described circular or polygonal shapes caused by light refracting through the lens assembly. What was on my bridge photographs was not circular. It was not polygonal. It was the shape and proportion of a human figure standing upright on a bridge deck. I did not argue. I thanked Dale. I filed the correspondence. I moved on, because that is what you do. You flag it, you get an answer, you accept the answer, or you don't. But either way, you move on, because the cycle doesn't stop. And there are 47 more bridges in the queue before December. But I started doing something I had not done before, which was keeping my own copies of every photograph I took of WC0412. Department images are uploaded to the state server where they are stored as part of the inspection record. Inspectors are not supposed to keep personal copies. I kept them anyway, on a portable hard drive that I stored in a fireproof safe in my basement. The kind you buy at a hardware store for documents you can't afford to lose. I told myself it was prudent documentation. I did not ask myself what I was documenting, or why I felt the need to keep it somewhere that couldn't be reached by the people who controlled the official record. In October 2018, I returned to WC0412 for my fourth inspection. I prepared differently this time. In the weeks leading up to the visit, I found myself lying awake past midnight, running through variables the way you do with a structural problem, isolating factors, controlling for unknowns, trying to design a test that would produce a definitive result. I brought a second camera, a personal Nikon DSLR, not department issued, with a completely different lens, system, and sensor architecture. If the anomaly was a lens artifact specific to the Olympus, it would not appear in photographs taken with the Nikon. I also brought a small tripod, which I set up at the west elevation position so I could ensure the framing was identical to previous cycles. I marked the tripod location with a piece of orange surveyor's tape tied to a root near the creek bank, so I could replicate the exact position in future visits. I shot every angle with both cameras. I documented with notation which camera took which shot. I spent nearly 2 hours longer at the site than I normally would have. I also did something else. After taking the west elevation photograph, I walked onto the bridge deck to the exact position where the figure had appeared in the 2016 image. I stood there. I looked around. The deck was empty. The road was empty in both directions. The pavement cracked and moss-edged and untouched. The woods on either side were still, that particular kind of deep woods stillness where you become aware of your own breathing, because it is the loudest thing in the landscape. Bonner Run moved slowly underneath, brown and shallow, and I could hear it faintly through the deck. A soft, continuous murmur, like a conversation in another room whose words you can almost but never quite make out. There was nothing on the bridge but me and the concrete and the railing bolts that needed replacing. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. I am not a superstitious person. I have a graduate degree. I believe in load ratings and tensile strength and the known properties of materials under stress. But I stood on that spot on the deck and I felt something that I will describe as carefully as I can. I felt observed. Not watched, observed. The way a specimen feels under a lens, if a specimen could feel. A detached, patient, cataloging attention from no direction I could identify. It was not malevolent, it was not cold, it was thorough. I felt as though something was taking a photograph of me, not with a camera, but with a kind of attention so precise and so unhurried that it amounted to the same thing. The feeling lasted until I stepped off the deck. The moment my boots hit the gravel of the south approach, it stopped. Cleanly, completely, the way a sound stops when you close a door. Whatever had been attending to me existed on the bridge and only on the bridge, and I had just walked out of its frame. I completed my inspection. I packed the equipment. I drove back toward the district office through 40 miles of winding 2-lane road, with the windows cracked and the radio on low, and the whole way I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Not because I expected to see anything, because the habit of checking had taken root without my permission. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday evening, with rain tapping the windows of my apartment, I sat down at my desk and opened the image files. The Nikon images and the Olympus images both contained the figure. It was not a lens artifact. 2 different cameras, 2 different lens systems, 2 different sensor technologies, same figure, same dark, upright, featureless shape in the same position on the deck. And the position was again closer, approximately 20 feet nearer to the south abutment than in 2016. I counted the railing posts. I measured against the deck joint locations, which I had recorded in my field notes down to the inch. The movement was consistent, 30-some feet every 2 years. At that rate, simple arithmetic told me it would reach the south end of the bridge, the end where I parked, where I set up my equipment, where I stood. By 2022, give or take a cycle. I sat with that number for a long time. The rain had stopped, and the apartment was quiet, and the screen glowed with the image of a bridge I had stood on that morning, and I thought about what it means to calculate the arrival time of something you cannot see. I reported it again. This time, I included the dual camera evidence and a written analysis of the positional progression with measurements. I sent it to Dale Everett. I sent a copy to my immediate supervisor, a man I will call Harmon, because I still live in this state and I don't know what using real names in certain contexts might trigger. Harmon read my supplementary note, looked at the photographs, and called me into his office the following Monday. He was not hostile. He was not dismissive. He was careful. He sat behind his desk with the photographs printed on letter-size paper, arranged in chronological order, left to right, like frames of a film. And he looked at them the way a man looks at something he wants very much to have an explanation for. He picked up the 2014 print, set it down, picked up the 2018 print, set it down. He did this twice, as if repetition might change what he was seeing. The office was quiet except for the ventilation and the muffled sound of someone's phone ringing down the hall. Then he looked at me and said something I remember exactly. He said, "Tom, do you understand what happens if I forward this up the chain?" I said I did. He said, "You're telling me that a figure nobody can see in person appears in every photographic record of this structure, and it's moving toward the camera." I said that was accurate, he said, "and you want me to put that in the system." I told him I thought it was important to document. He nodded slowly. He gathered the printouts and put them back in the folder. He told me he would send them to the division chief with a recommendation for a supplementary site visit by a 2-person team. He told me to continue my normal rotation and not to discuss the matter with other inspectors until the review was complete. Then he looked at me once more, held my eyes for a beat longer than felt natural, and I could see him deciding whether to say the next thing and deciding not to. The 2-person site visit happened in March 2019. 2 engineers from the Staunton office drove out to WC 0412 and conducted a full inspection. They took their own photographs with their own equipment. Their report, which I obtained through the internal document system, described the bridge as structurally deficient but serviceable, recommended continued monitoring, and made no mention of any photographic anomaly. Their photographs, which I reviewed on a Thursday afternoon in the empty conference room at the district office, showed an empty bridge, no figure, clean deck in every elevation shot, every approach shot, every detail shot. But they were not me. They were not using my cameras. They were not standing where I stand. Or perhaps, more accurately, I was not there. I thought about that distinction for a long time. Weeks. I turned it over during the long drives between inspection sites, letting the rhythm of the road and the monotony of the mile markers carry the question. I thought about whether the figure was specific to the bridge or specific to me, whether it appeared in photographs of WC0412 or in photographs taken by Thomas Kehoe at WC0412. Those are different hypotheses, and they have very different implications. And in the spring of 2019, I was not ready to test the more frightening one. In 2020, the inspection cycle was disrupted by the pandemic. Non-critical inspections were deferred by 6 months. WC-0412, rated structurally deficient but not critical, was pushed from October 2020 to April 2021. I did not visit the bridge in an official capacity for nearly 3 years. During those 3 years, I did something I am not proud of. I drove out to WC-0412 on my own time, outside the inspection cycle, and took photographs. I did this 4 times, once in December 2019, once in June 2020, once in January 2021, and once in March 2021, a few weeks before the rescheduled official inspection. Each time I went alone. Each time I used the Nikon. Each time I set up the tripod on the same surveyor-taped route and shot the west elevation in the same framing. The first unofficial visit was the hardest. December 2019. A cold, bright morning, frost thick on the gravel, and the creek running clear and loud from recent rain. I sat in the truck for 10 minutes before I got out, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, watching my breath cloud the windshield in slow pulses. I had no official reason to be there. No inspection form, no protocol number, no mandate. Just a man with a camera driving an hour and a half to a bridge because he needed to know whether something moved when no one was counting. The figure was present. It had not moved from its 2018 position. The same distance from the south abutment, the same dark, upright shape, left of center on the deck. June 2020, a humid afternoon. Cicadas screaming in the trees, so loud the air seemed to vibrate with it. The road shimmering with heat. Same position. No change. January 2021. Snow on the ground. The bridge deck slick with melt. The railing posts capped with white, and the creek frozen at the edges. Same position. March 2021. Early spring. The trees still bare. The creek swollen with snowmelt and running fast and brown beneath the arch. Same position. 4 visits. 4 identical photographs. The figure held its ground. It moved during inspections. It moved when I was there on official business, following the prescribed protocol, filing the official record. When I came on my own, outside the system, the figure held its position like a piece of equipment waiting for authorization. It advanced only through the formality, only through the procedure, only when the visit was documented and submitted through the State Bridge Management System. As if the paperwork itself were the mechanism, as if the form, the file, the upload. These were not records of observation but permissions for transit. I did not include these unofficial visits in any report. They were not sanctioned. I would have been reprimanded for conducting unauthorized site visits on a structure flagged for review, but I kept the photographs on the hard drive in the fireproof safe. They show what I have described. The official 2021 inspection took place in April. I drove out on a Tuesday morning, the roads still dark with overnight rain, mist hanging in the hollows like something reluctant to leave. The mountains were soft gray shrapes behind it, half dissolved, and the road to the bridge felt longer than usual. The curves unfamiliar even after years, as if the distance itself had thickened. I followed protocol. I used both cameras. I took the standard photographs. I also did something new. I set up a GoPro on the tripod aimed at the west elevation and let it record continuous video for the entire 3 hours I was on site. My reasoning was simple. If the figure appeared in still photographs, but not to the naked eye, I wanted to know what video would show. I wanted to find the boundary between what could see it and what could not. The figure appeared in 19 still photographs. Nearly every shot that included the deck from any angle showed it somewhere. In the center of wide framings, in the margins of close-ups, tucked into the gaps between railing posts, In one image taken from the north approach, it appeared to be standing at roughly the same spot where I had stood in 2018 when I walked to its position, as if it remembered where I had been, or as if the positions were linked in some way I could not diagram. The GoPro video showed nothing. 3 hours of an empty bridge. I scrubbed through it, frame by frame, on my laptop that night. The blue light of the screen the only illumination in the room, and there was not a single moment where the deck showed anything but concrete and railing and the pale sky beyond. The figure existed only in still photographs, only in the frozen image, only in the captured frame, and it was closer again. It had reached a point approximately 15 feet from the south abutment, 15 feet from the end of the bridge, 15 feet from the gravel pull-off where I parked my truck. 15 feet from me, I filed my report. I included the dual camera evidence, the positional measurements, and the GoPro comparison. I sent it to Harmon. Harmon called me into his office again. This time, he was different. He sat with his hands flat on the desk, palms down, the way you hold something steady, and I noticed that the folder with my materials was not alone. There was a second folder beside it, thinner, with a red routing slip on the cover that I recognized as interdepartmental legal correspondence. He was not careful this time. He was strained. The lines around his mouth were deeper than I remembered. And he spoke without the measured pauses I was used to, as if he wanted the conversation finished before it had properly started. He told me that the division chief had consulted with V. Diat's legal office and with the Federal Highway Administration's Bridge Program Coordinator. He told me that the official position was that the recurring photographic anomaly on WC 0412 was a site-specific environmental artifact. Atmospheric conditions, deck surface reflectivity, digital sensor behavior. He told me this position was final, and that no further supplementary notes regarding the anomaly would be accepted into the bridge management system. Then he stood and closed the door, and the click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. He sat back down and told me, off the record, that the division chief had asked him a question he didn't know how to answer. The chief had asked how many other inspectors across the state had reported similar anomalies on other structures, and whether there was any mechanism for tracking such reports. He didn't know how to answer because, until my reports, there had been no mechanism, no category, no field in the database, no drop-down menu, no checkbox, no form. The system had no way to record what I was recording because the system had never anticipated that it would need to. And rather than create one, and rather than open a door that might reveal how many other inspectors had seen things they couldn't file, the decision had been made to close the question. Harmon looked at me across his desk and said, "I'd let this one go, Tom." I watched his face. He was not threatening me. He was not warning me. He was asking me to do something he wished someone had asked him to do before he read my reports, and became unable to stop seeing the figure every time he looked at a bridge photograph. He was asking me to put it down before the weight of it became structural. I did not let it go, but I stopped filing supplementary notes. Instead, I began requesting historical inspection records for WC 0412 through the state archive system. Under VDOT policy, all bridge inspection records dating back to the implementation of the National Bridge Inspection standards in 1971 are maintained in either digital or microfilm format. Older records, where they exist, are held in the Commonwealth Transportation Library in Richmond. It took me 4 months to assemble a complete history. 4 months of archive requests and microfilm readers in basement offices, of driving to Richmond on my days off, of phone calls to retired clerks who remembered the old filing cabinets and could tell me which drawer held which decade. The earliest record I found was from 1974, conducted by an inspector whose name was listed as R.E. Dellinger. The reports continued at 2-year intervals through the present, with a few gaps in the 80s and early 90s, where records appeared to have been lost or misfiled. The reports from 1974 through 2004 were paper-based, scanned copies of handwritten forms, typewritten summaries, and few Polaroid photographs taped to inspection sheets with yellowing adhesive that had stiffened and darkened over the decades. The photographs were small and degraded. Their colors shifted toward amber and green, the way Polaroids do when they age. I examined everyone under magnification, holding a loupe to the monitor screen. In 1974 and 1976, the photographs showed an empty bridge, clean deck, open sky. In 1978, a Polaroid of the east elevation showed something on the deck. It was faint, the image quality was poor, the print badly yellowed, and the shape appeared as a slight darkening near the north end of the span. The far end, the beginning, it could have been anything. A shadow, a stain, a person who happened to be crossing. In 1980, a Polaroid of the west elevation, the same angle I would later use, the angle every inspector uses because the manual prescribes it, showed a shape on the deck at roughly mid-span. It was clearer than the 1978 image, upright, dark, alone on an empty bridge on a road that no one used. In 1982, the inspection record contained no photographs, not a single one, and at the bottom of the handwritten form, in a different hand than the inspector's, smaller, more deliberate, written with what appeared to be a different pen, was a note: recommend photo documentation be limited to structural elements only. Non-structural artifacts in previous photo sets have caused filing confusion. See District Supervisor. Someone had noticed 40 years before me, and someone had decided that the solution was to stop photographing the thing that shouldn't be there. From 1984 through 1998, the inspection photographs of WC0412 were tightly cropped. Close-ups of abutments, deck joints, railing connections, spall patterns, no elevation shots. No full bridge framings. No photographs that included enough of the deck to show whether anything was standing on it. For 14 years and 7 inspection cycles, the documentation protocol for this one structure had been narrowed to exclude the possibility of capturing the anomaly. Not by removing it, not by explaining it, not by investigating it, but by making the lens look only where the answer was: concrete and steel, and nothing else. In 2000, the first digital photographs appeared in the record. A new inspector, different from the previous one who had retired, had followed the standard protocol without alteration and taken full elevation shots, the way you are supposed to, the way the manual requires. And there it was. A dark upright shape on the deck, left of center, near the north abutment, the far end, either starting over or continuing from where it had last been seen before the frame was cropped around it. I printed the 2000 photograph and placed it beside my 2012 photograph on my desk under the fluorescent lights of the empty district office at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. In 2000, the figure was near the north end. In 2012, it was at approximately the quarter span point, having moved south. In 2014, mid-span. The progression was consistent going back at least 22 years. If I extrapolated further using the rate of movement I had measured, The figure's position in 1978 would have been near the north abutment, which matched the Polaroid. It had been crossing the bridge for nearly 50 years, moving south, moving toward the end where inspectors park, advancing 30-some feet each official cycle, visible only in still photographs taken by a human hand during an authorized inspection, invisible to the eye, invisible to video, invisible to anyone who wasn't conducting the sanctioned procedure. And it was almost at the end. I want to describe what the historical discovery did to me because I think it matters more than the fear. I did not panic. I did not feel vindicated. I felt a kind of heavy physical sadness, as if I had been carrying something I thought was mine alone, and had just learned it had been passed from hand to hand for decades, inspector to inspector, and no one had ever spoken its name. At least one, whoever wrote that 1982 note, had tried to manage it. The cropped photographs from the late 80s and 90s were not an accident or a stylistic choice. Someone had deliberately narrowed the documentation standard for a single bridge in a 900 structure inventory to avoid capturing evidence of something they could not explain and did not want in the file. And then a new inspector had come along. In 2000, someone who didn't know the unwritten rule, and the figure had reappeared in the wider frame. And then I had come along. And here we are. I debated for weeks about what to do with the historical evidence. I took long evening walks through my neighborhood in Roanoke, past the neat houses, and the trimmed lawns, and the mailboxes with their small red flags, and I turned the problem over the way I would turn over a structural assessment, looking for the load path, the failure mode, the point where intervention might change the outcome. I couldn't file the analysis through the system. Harmon had told me in clear terms that the matter was closed. I couldn't go above Harmon without creating a confrontation that would almost certainly end my career. I was 51 years old. I had 19 years of state service and a pension I could access at 55. I had a mortgage and a daughter in college, and a life that depended on the continued willingness of the Commonwealth of Virginia to deposit a paycheck into my account every 2 weeks. So I did what the inspector before me had done, and the one before that. I kept quiet. I kept my photographs. I kept the historical printouts in the fireproof safe beside the hard drive. And I waited for the next cycle. The 2023 inspection of WC041s was scheduled for October 18th. In the weeks leading up to it, I developed a habit I had never had before. Each morning, before I left for the office, I would stand at the kitchen window with my coffee, always in the blue mug, the one my daughter had painted at a ceramics studio when she was 11, uneven glaze and all. And I would look at the street outside, the parked cars, the neighbor's fence, the oak tree that dropped acorns on my truck every autumn. And I would study it the way I study a bridge, looking for what didn't belong, looking for the element present in the image but not in the world. I never found anything. The street was always just a street. But the looking had become compulsive, a ritual I could not skip without feeling that I had left something unchecked. I drove out early on the 18th, arriving just after 7. The weather was clear, unusual for October in that part of the state. The sky a thin, pale blue that hadn't quite committed to the day, the light sharp enough to make the bridge's concrete glow almost white against the dark line of the trees. The gravel pull-off was unchanged. The surveyor's tape on the route had faded from orange to a pale salmon, but was still there. I set up the tripod. I mounted the Nikon. I placed a second GoPro, this one set to time-lapse mode rather than continuous video, taking one frame every 2 seconds. I had thought about this for 2 years, turning it over in the dark of sleepless nights. Continuous video had shown nothing. Still photographs taken by hand showed the figure. A time-lapse was technically a series of still photographs taken automatically by a machine without a human pressing the shutter. I wanted to know where the boundary was, whether it was the stillness of the image that mattered or the hand that made it. I walked the deck. I performed the inspection. My hands knew the work even when my mind was elsewhere, and I let them lead. The bridge was in worse shape than 2021. A new longitudinal crack had opened in the south arch, running nearly 8 feet along the entrados like a dark seam splitting the concrete from within, and 2 railing posts were loose enough to move by hand, their anchor bolts corroded to a fragile orange lace that crumbled between my fingers. I documented everything per protocol. I took the standard photographs. I tried not to look at the south end of the deck. I tried not to think about the arithmetic, that if the progression held, the figure would now be at the south abutment, at the edge, at the threshold where the bridge ends and the gravel begins, at the place where I was standing when I set up the tripod, when I raised the camera, when I pressed the shutter and gave it permission to take another step. I finished the inspection in 2.5 hours. I packed my equipment, cameras in their cases, tripod collapsed, GoPro in my jacket pocket, ladder strapped to the truck rack. I drove away. In the rearview mirror, the bridge receded around the curve, the arch disappearing behind the trees, and then it was gone, and the road was just a road again, and the only sound was the engine and the gravel pinging off the undercarriage. I did not review the photographs that night. I could not. I sat in my apartment and looked at the hard drive on the kitchen table, the small black rectangle, no larger than a deck of cards, and I understood with a clarity I can only describe as structural, as fundamental to the load-bearing capacity of my comprehension, that what was on that memory card would either show the figure at the south end of the bridge or the figure standing off the bridge entirely, on the gravel where I had parked. I did not know which answer frightened me more. I ate dinner without tasting it. I washed the plate and set it in the rack and stood at the sink for a while, looking at the dark window above it. I went to bed and lay there listening to the building settle. The creak of floor joists, the tick of the baseboard heater, the small, honest sounds a structure makes when it carries weight it doesn't complain about. I opened the files 4 days later. Saturday morning, October sunlight coming through the window, warm on my desk, coffee in the blue mug. The hard drive connected, the folder open, the images arranged by timestamp, neat and sequential, the way the system requires. The west elevation photograph showed the bridge in profile, exactly as it had in every previous cycle. The arch, the deck, the railing, the tree line. The figure was not on the bridge. For one breath, one full, involuntary breath, I felt relief. The kind that makes your hands shake and your vision blur and your throat close because your body is releasing something it has held so tightly for so long that you had forgotten what it felt like to let go. Then I looked at the rest of the photograph. The figure was on the south bank, off the bridge, past the abutment. Standing on the gravel pull-off, approximately 10 feet from the position where I had set up the tripod. It had crossed the bridge. In 45 years, across more than 20 inspection cycles, moving only when the official visit was conducted, visible only in still photographs taken by a person performing a sanctioned duty, the figure had walked the full length of WC0412 and stepped off the end. I went through the remaining photographs with a slowness that felt like walking towards something I could not turn away from. 152 images. The figure appeared in 31 of them. In some, it was at the south end of the bridge, between the last railing post and the abutment wall, as if caught mid-stride in the act of crossing the threshold between structure and earth. In others, it was on the gravel, at varying distances from the tripod, but never more than 15 feet from where I had stood. In one photograph, a close-up of the south-bearing seat, taken from a crouching position at the base of the abutment. It was directly above me on the deck, leaning over the railing, angled down toward where I had been kneeling. The word that came to me, unbidden and exact, was inspecting. It was inspecting me. The GoPro time-lapse captured 2,700 frames. I reviewed everyone, watching the light shift across the bridge, like a slow hand, the shadows rotating, the creek glinting and dimming. The figure appeared in none, not one. A still photograph taken by hand captured it. An automated still photograph taken by a machine on a timer did not. The figure exists in photographs made by a person, by the inspector. I filed the 2023 report without supplementary notes. I rated the bridge. I submitted the photographs that showed the structural deficiencies, the cracks and the loose posts and the spalled concrete. I did not submit the images that showed the figure standing on the gravel 10 feet from my tripod. I did not submit the one of it leaning over the railing above my crouching body. Those are on the hard drive in the fireproof safe beside everything else I have carried and cannot put down. 1 week after I submitted the report, I received a memorandum from the division chief's office in a plain manila envelope with my name typed on a routing label. The memorandum informed me that WC-042 had been reclassified as a limited access inspection structure, and that future inspections would be conducted by a designated 2-person team from the central office, effective immediately. My assignment to the structure was terminated. No reason was given beyond operational restructuring of the Western Division rotation. I recognized the maneuver. It was the same thing that had been done in 1982. Not an investigation, not an explanation, but an administrative adjustment designed to route around the problem. Reassign the inspector. Change the protocol, narrow the frame, remove the person who sees it, and the seeing stops. That is the faith the system holds about itself. That if you change the form, you change the reality. That if you crop the photograph tightly enough, what falls outside it ceases to exist. Except I don't think the seeing has stopped. I don't think it works that way. Because there is one more thing I need to tell you, and it is the reason I am speaking now, instead of keeping quiet and collecting my leave pay and waiting for the pension to vest. Something happened not at the bridge, but in my apartment in Roanoke, 3 weeks after the 2023 inspection, on a night in November, when I was not thinking about bridges or photographs or anything at all. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a report on an overpass in Botetourt County. Routine work, crack mapping, joint condition ratings, the comfortable tedium of a structure that behaves the way structures should. Rain was tapping the window in a gentle, irregular rhythm, and the apartment was warm and quiet and ordinary. The kind of ordinary I had spent 9 years learning not to take for granted. My phone was on the desk beside me, screen down. It buzzed. A notification. I picked it up. The notification was from my cloud storage service, telling me that a new photograph had been synced to my account. I opened the app. The photograph was in a folder I did not recognize, labeled with a string of numbers that matched the format of a VDOT inspection reference code. 2 letters, a hyphen, 4 digits, but it was not a code assigned to any structure in my rotation. I had never seen it. The photograph showed the interior of my apartment, my desk, my chair. The monitor glowing with the Botetourt County report, taken from the hallway, looking into the room through the open door. The angle was approximately 5 feet off the ground, the height of a person standing still and holding a camera at chest level. I was sitting at the desk in the photograph. I could see myself from behind, my shoulders, the back of my head, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off the wall beside me. The image was sharp. The lighting was consistent. It was, by every technical measure, a properly exposed, well-composed photograph of me in my home, taken from a position inside my hallway, by no one. There was no one in my apartment. I live alone. The door was locked. I checked the deadbolt. The chain was in place the way it always is after dark. I checked every room, the closets, behind the shower curtain, under the bed, the narrow space between the refrigerator and the wall. I checked the hallway, standing in the exact spot the photograph had been taken from. And I felt nothing. No presence, no observation, no cataloging attention. Just the hallway. Just the carpet, and the coat hooks, and the light switch, and the faint smell of the rain coming through the cracked kitchen window. I checked the metadata. The camera was listed as unknown. The timestamp matched the moment I received the notification, down to the second. The GPS coordinates matched my apartment. The file size and resolution were consistent with a modern digital camera. Everything about it was technically correct, procedurally sound, a flawless piece of documentation. I deleted the photograph. I emptied the trash. I disconnected the cloud service. I reformatted the phone. And then I sat in my kitchen with every light on and my hands around a cold cup of coffee and understood something I had been refusing to understand for 9 years. It does not live on the bridge. The bridge was the distance. The bridge was the approach. The inspections were not observations. They were increments. Every time I went to that structure and pressed the shutter, I was not documenting the figure's position. I was granting it another step, the official procedure, the sanctioned visit, the filed report. These were not records of an anomaly. They were the mechanism by which it moved. Each photograph was a footfall. Each inspection cycle was a stride, and I had been the one walking it forward, year by year, frame by frame, carrying it across the full length of the span on the back of my own diligence. Now it is here, wherever here is, off the bridge, past the abutment, in the gravel, in the road, in the cloud, in the hallway. Holding a camera I cannot see, taking photographs I am now inside of. I am on administrative leave. Officially, this is because of a documentation irregularity in my 2023 filings. The division found, during a routine audit, that I had been keeping unauthorized copies of inspection photographs, which violates records management policy. Unofficially, I believe they wanted me away from the bridges. Not just WC0412, all of them. Someone in the chain looked at what I had assembled and decided the simplest solution was to remove the inspector from the field entirely. I have not taken a photograph of anything since November. I have covered the cameras on my laptop and my phone with strips of black electrical tape pressed down hard at the edges. When I pass reflective surfaces, storefront windows, the glass doors of the grocery store, the dark screen of the television before I turn it on, I move quickly. I do not look at windows after dark. I keep the blinds closed. These are small adjustments. The kind of thing you tell yourself is reasonable. Some mornings I wake and the apartment feels measured. There is no other word for it. The distances between objects feel noted. The angle of light through the blinds falls in a way that feels framed, composed, as if someone has chosen this exposure. this depth of field, this moment to document the condition of the man inside. I cannot explain this in any language my training provides. I can only tell you what it feels like, and it feels like an inspection. The next scheduled visit to WC0412 is October 2025. A two-person team from the central office. New inspectors, new cameras, new protocol. They will drive out to the bridge, park on the gravel pull-off where the surveyor's tape has faded to salmon on the route, and take the standard photographs. They will follow the manual. They will do their jobs. And I do not know what they will find on the deck. I do not know if the figure will be there for them, or if it was only ever there for me. I do not know if it will have moved further, off the gravel, up the road, south toward the highway, south toward Roanoke, south toward the desk where I sat, and the hallway where it stood and took my photograph with a camera that does not exist. But I know this. In 45 years of inspection records, the figure only appeared during official visits. It advanced only through sanctioned documentation. It existed only inside photographs taken by a human hand. During an authorized procedure, it obeyed the system perfectly, more perfectly than I ever did. It followed every rule, met every cycle, appeared at every prescribed interval. It was never late, never absent, never out of compliance. It was the most reliable element in the entire inspection history of that bridge. And now I sit in my apartment, on leave, with no cameras, no inspections, no official duties, and I find myself thinking about what my grandfather said. That a good bridge talks to you, that it tells you where it hurts. He never said anything about what happens when something finishes crossing one. I have started checking my cloud storage again. Not because I want to, because there are mornings when I wake and the apartment has that quality. Measured, cataloged, quietly thorough, as if someone walked through it in the hours I was sleeping. With a practiced eye and a steady hand, noted the cracks in the plaster and the settlement in the door frames and the load-bearing capacity of the man living inside, and filed their findings somewhere I will never be permitted to access. The inspection is not something I do anymore. The inspection is something that is being done to me, on a schedule I cannot see, documented in a system I was never told about, and I have no way of knowing how many cycles are left before the report is finalized. I just know the photographs are still being taken, and I am in every one of them.